All right, Big Bang. Today is Tuesday. It's August 22nd. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. As always on Tuesday, I am joined by Chief. We are here, located in Chicago, Illinois, ready to do a podcast.
For now. We're on our way to Boston.
Oh, correct. Well,
right?
Tomorrow we will be.
Yeah.
One day for the Barstool Awards. Should be cool.
Yeah.
Should be
good.
cool.
I think you can get tickets.
And we're talking Operation. I know it's not Mongoose.
Nope. Operation Mockingbird.
Operation Mocking. I was close. Operation MO.
What was Mongoose was like the Bay of Pigs overthrow Castro thing
Cuba.
that kind of got Kennedy killed. Maybe.
Allegedly.
Possibly.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
Maybe.
Unless they elect Kennedy.
Maybe one day they'll let us know. Oh, is RFK saying they'll declassify everything, JFK?
You would think, right? I mean, he talks about it pretty openly. He thinks it was the CIA, and he recommends some book, and but yeah, he's like, they killed my uncle and possibly killed his father. He's like less committal about them killing his father.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he did argue for Sirhan to be released.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. So that was during COVID, maybe, when his sentence was up.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before we really get into Operation Mockingbird, though, I do want to talk to you guys about ChevyDriveChicago.com. And they got huge news. We've been telling you all about it for weeks. And it really is a big deal because them being partners with the Chicago Bears is awesome. That's right. Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana Chevy dealers are proud to announce that they're the new official partner of the Chicago Bears. So that means tailgate season just got a lot more exciting, and it's just got a lot more Silverado-y and Colorado-y.
Those are, the Bears signed some big boys. They got Darnell Wright. They got they beefed up. This is how you beef up in the parking lot. You get a Colorado, you get a Silverado, you get a Chevy. You roll in like the Bears should. That's
it. That's what you need to kick off Bears season. So head to ChevyDriveChicago.com to shop and find your local Chevy dealer today. Or if you're not feeling the Silverado or the Colorado, go check out the rest of their fleet. It's all good stuff. Or if you need a little tune-up, go check out their service stations. Safe, reliable, good quality service. ChevyDriveChicago.com. They'll send you right to your closest dealer. It's that simple, folks. Go do it. All right, Operation Mockingbird, Chief.
Yeah, so this is like something I feel like has been talked about a little bit in some circles, like the Matt Taibbi's of the world reference this. But Operation Mockingbird is basically the CIA infiltrating news organizations around the world to manipulate, coerce, buy off journalists to promote whatever the CIA's particular agenda is at that time. And started in 1950, and that's like a big problem, right? Like that means like, and we've seen this with like the Twitter files too, where it's like you have the FBI and the CIA they're also contacting like the they're managing different media outlets allegedly, and then there's documentation of meetings and stuff with like the big four tech companies, Google, Facebook, Meta, Twitter, and Microsoft. So that's like they're able to shape, the government is shaping public opinion basically with domestic propaganda. And there was this was a thing that, it was born in the CIA in 1951, and it was supposed to be just abroad, okay? And they were going to use it to kind of push back against the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was doing the whole thing, that they had basically bought this thing that was run out of Europe, I believe out of Switzerland, or Austria, which was the Organization of Journalists, or International Organization of Journalists. And they would use that across the world to promote like the communist propaganda. And you started seeing, and this was like, right after World War II, it's like the peak of the Cold War. It's like this race. It's like these two clashing ideologies, and it was a race. And little by little, or a lot, you started to see some of these countries fall, where you saw China go communist. You saw Cuba go communist. Laos was going communist. Vietnam was going communist. You had all of Eastern Europe, which was like under the thumb of the Soviet Union, but they were all communist. So it was like a real growing existential threat to the United States. So they're like, well, if they're doing propaganda abroad, we're going to do propaganda abroad. So they started bankrolling radio stations, newspapers, magazines, all these different things, trying to sway public opinion in, the Congo and all these other places where there was like this rising tide of communism and socialism. So that was the thing. But they had a charter, that said, hey, like, you are never to use these tactics domestically. You can only fuck up other places abroad. And like, Greece was almost went communist, and they had to kind of steal that election, and they had all sorts of propaganda against the communists to make sure that didn't happen in the 50s. Like, these were all like the CIA, like the plans division, the black ops. And this was a big part of how they would get things done. And then it came out, what Watergate is?
Yeah.
Okay, so when they were doing the Senate investigation, the Watergate committee going into this, they stumbled across some documents that were revealing some of these abuses by the CIA. So that led to a New York Times reporter digging into this a little bit more, and he published this article that said, hey, like, they were the CIA was involved in they had referenced some of these media things, but the CIA was involved in infiltrating civil rights movements, student movements, anti-war movements, and all these different things, and it was done, and then in news organizations. So that led to like a further investment. Like, wait a second, now we're going to have the church committee. And the church committee unveiled, like, the church committee was all about finding all these abuses that were done by the CIA, okay, which they found a fucking lot. You've heard of MK Ultra. I don't know if we've ever, right? You know about that one?
Yeah.
Okay, and we've talked about that. That's where they're doing like psychedelics and using like prostitutes, and they're testing LSD and stuff and doing all sorts of crazy shit on American citizens. And who's like Manson, like the Manson was supposedly the Unabomber. These guys are supposedly people that were in the MK Ultra program. They had this other one called COINTELPRO, which was straight up just domestic surveillance. That's the ones where they were doing like the civil rights groups. They had another one that they discovered through that was Family Jewels. Okay, Family Jewels was the code name for all foreign assassinations, of which there were many. Like they killed the leader of Vietnam. They killed this guy in Africa who was a democratically elected leader called Patrice Lumumba. And these are things the CIA is just doing on their own. Like, Kennedy was president when Patrice Lumumba got killed. I'm almost positive. Might have been. I'm pretty sure. And he did not authorize it. You know who Charles de Gaulle is? He was a president of France. And he was like, when France, like, he was in exile during World War II, and they had the resistance. And when we landed, he was like the #1 French general. Huh. So in World War II, and then he became president, and then the CIA tried to have him killed. Okay, so then obviously he's like the plot got subverted somehow. And they were going to do this coup with like these 4 French generals, and they were going to kill, and it was all done by the CIA. So Kennedy, and this is when Kennedy was president, he calls Charles de Gaulle and like the French ambassador. He's like, I got to let you know, I had nothing to do with this. Okay. But there's a segment of my government that I do not have control over. And he's talking about the CIA. Like they just did whatever the fuck they wanted, and there's no way to stop them. So, and then they also uncovered this thing called Project Shamrock, which was when that started actually as early as 1948. Like, I think it's like right around the same time as like the OSS and the CIA were like the CIA was just becoming a thing. And they were taking all like telecommunications stuff from radio stations and TV stations and all that data of what people were watching and when, and sharing it directly with the CIA. So it's like all these things that are supposedly illegal were found like kind of by accident that the CIA was doing. Like, it was like, we're looking into these different, hey, you should not be infiltrating these groups. And it's like, wait a second, you've infiltrated the media. Like, you've broken your own charter. So they were doing propaganda through the Washington Post, through ABC, through NBC. And they say like a great example of that from back then. So there's like the term conspiracy theory, right? Well, that term had been around for a long time, because conspiracy theories all that, like the technical definition is just like one or more, or more than one person colluding to do something. Like you and I could have a conspiracy to, I don't know, push Danny down, like whatever. Like as long as two people are doing a plan that's like, doesn't even necessarily have to be devious. But they were the ones like in 1967 where through the use of the term in the media that they made the term conspiracy theory have all these negative connotations because they didn't want anybody poking around about the Warren Commission and the Kennedy assassination. So it's like you were just late, and if you ask questions, you were just labeled as a conspiracy theorist, which ended up being like code for you're a crazy person. So then nobody wanted to be that. So then no one really looked into the Kennedy assassination in a serious way for another 15 years until you had another one of these committees that came out of the church committee was the House Committee on Assassinations. And they were the ones that uncovered that like media manipulation and coercion. And they ended up finding out that they had the CIA on their payroll listed as assets, had 400 journalists and media members across the world acting on their behalf. Like they were either bribed, they were blackmailed. So it's like, hey, like we know you're gay, we'll out you. We know you are having an affair, like we will make sure your wife finds out unless, or they would, coerce these people, these journalists. So then it's like, they fucking got me. So it's like, hey, like say this about anti-war people, say this about Martin Luther King, and they would just plant all, so that you have like their narrative coming through what are supposed to be independent journalists because the CIA had them by the fucking balls. And they was just like, what are you going to do? So we want to go to Vietnam. So you make it seem like it's a good idea until it became like so obvious that like the whole country still ended up being against it. But that was like a narrative for a long time. Like, you were a coward if you didn't go to Vietnam, and you're a hippie. You're all these terrible things if you were anti-war. You're anti-war, anti-American. And like that narrative really came out of the CIA and this Operation Mockingbird, where they, were physically threatening, trying to ruin people's journalists' lives in order to get them to act on their behalf, which was highly, highly illegal. And there was a report by this guy named Carl Bernstein where it was like they were bankrolling, and this is still supposedly true to this day, that the number one financier of media companies around the world is the CIA. So if you have a newspaper in fucking Nigeria, South Africa, Austria, Southeast Asia, wherever, there's a good chance that a large portion of your financing is coming out of U.S. taxpayer dollars because they're trying to, and through the CIA. No one knows exactly what the CIA budget is. It's classified.
Nefarious, so
it's classified.
Doesn't surprise me.
It's fucking insane. So, and like papers in Ukraine, wherever, all of that is funded, or a lot, there are places funded totally by the CIA. And then you had, but again, in 1976, who was head of the CIA in 1976? He's a former president.
Kennedy?
No, well, he was dead by then. George H.W. Bush. Okay, so he became president in 1988. He was vice president for Reagan, but before he was vice president for Reagan, he was running the CIA. So when they were having all these investigations into the malpractice of the CIA, George Bush comes out and says, hey, like he said that effective immediately, the CIA will not enter into any paid contractual relationship with any news correspondent accredited with any news organization in the United States. So that was supposed to be the plan, like immediately. But then they have, in terms of like the language for Operation Mockingbird, there's no real like declassified documents about it. It's mentioned in these other documents, and supposedly what that typically means, if you can't have declassified about the actual program itself, it means it's still active. It's still an active operation. So even though George H.W. Bush like just declared this, there's nothing like necessarily legally binding about it. He's just the head of the CIA. Like we have laws on the books preventing this. It's called the Smith-Mundt Act. Okay. Where it's like then that happened like right after World War II. Like you're not allowed to propagandize United States citizens through manipulation of the media. and they just have been ignoring that for 50 years. But it was like, if you got caught doing it, like supposedly there would be like harsh punishments and jail time and all that. You get up into 2012, they have the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which is HR 4310. And that was in 2012, so Obama signed it into law. And that made it legal for the government, like the State Department, to produce materials. Like they can just basically produce news segments and distribute them to the New York Times, MSNBC, Fox News, whoever they wanted. And there was nothing that there wasn't illegal. So they made the language very ambiguous. So now it became a thing where it's like, hey, this was illegal. And they're like, we should modernize that act that prevented the government from using propaganda against its own people. And then they just wrote it into law. Like, yeah, we can just do whatever we want now. And like, no one, like, who the fuck knows what HR 4310 is? Nobody. And they're like, and it sounds nice. We got to modernize this old thing. No, you fucking didn't. You just opened the door so the CIA and NSA or FBI can do whatever the fuck they want, and they can put out whatever narrative they want. And that's how you end up with these institutions where you're getting deplatformed and you're getting smeared and you're getting all these things if you go against the narrative, which is, we've seen a lot of that the last 3-4 years. But historically, you were not supposed to be able to have news material generated by the State Department and put out as if it's like news from those organizations. Like the news is supposed to be a free and independent press. Mm-hmm. Is what is written into the Bill of Rights, that we have the right, to a free and independent press. This act really blurs that line. So if you have people in your pocket one way or another, and then you're able to distribute the news that you want to distribute, it becomes like that. You ever heard of that? Did you ever study this in school? The allegory of the cave. Okay, so it's like, I think it's like from like Greek or Roman or whatever, some kind of older philosophy thing. But it's basically like, you're a baby, okay? You're raised in this cave, and they just shine a light from the back, and no one ever talks to you or anything like that. And they just make like shadow puppets on the wall. But that is the only thing you ever see. So that is what you, like, your reality. That's your reality. You don't know about the outside world. Everything that you know as a human is just whatever you see as shadow puppets on the wall. And like that analogy here, or it's analogous to this, because it's like whatever you think your reality is, it's just because whatever the government is showing you through their news agencies. And that's why you're supposed to have like that separation by law. Otherwise, you're just going to believe whatever the government will tell you. And that's that's not typically good for a healthy democracy. So it's like a very serious thing. And you combine that with like the Patriot Act. You know what the Patriot Act is?
Yeah.
So that
after 9/11. It
was after 9/11, and you really had like 3 senators, okay? So it was written fast and passed almost unanimously, okay? And you had 3 senators. You had Tom Daschle, I think Leahy, and Russ Feingold. And they're like, well, wait a second. Like, this might be unconstitutional. And do you know what happened to them? They were the victims of that anthrax attack. Okay.
Ooh.
So they were the ones who had the anthrax sent to them. So it was like, holy shit. So then, Russ Feingold was the only guy who ended up voting against it. He was a senator from Wisconsin. And it passed in the Senate like 98-1 or 96-1 or something like that. And the other 2 guys like didn't vote. And it was this thick, like dense thing. And it would basically allow the government to access everything. They could access your bank accounts. It was much easier to get wiretaps. Like, it was all in the name of like preventing terrorism. But again, it was the same thing. It was like they're just kind of allowed to spy on American citizens, even though they never, like, historically that's unconstitutional. And they've traced that anthrax, okay, that was used in those. Remember they sent them in the envelopes?
Yeah, I remember this.
That was fucking scary.
Very
right?
scary. That was like a big, like, pull the fire alarm, like, this is the next big thing moment in America.
Oh, I remember being like, we're all gonna die. I remember thinking after 9/11 that, like, they were going to shoot up schools and malls and just like go down to Michigan Avenue and just like with AKs and they're going to start sending anthrax and dirty bombs. It was like a very scary time. But guess where they traced that anthrax back to?
Where?
A U.S. military weapons lab.
No shit.
Okay, so because it was like it's like highly illegal to have that stuff and to use that stuff. So there's very few places that are even able to produce it. So it was like they're saying that was really like a false flag to scare people to get like, yeah, fucking pass this Patriot Act because we got to stop like the anthrax attacks that are coming through on our government. And like that came from it came from the Defense Department. So and that's another thing that's just not really ever talked about. So it's like, then that's passed. So when you combine the Smith Modernization Act, where they're able to just tell you anything, and then you have, and then they gather your data illegally. That was another Obama. Oh, it's metadata. It's metadata. It's not that big of a deal. It's doing big scrapes. They're taking everybody's data from these tech companies. They're spying on U.S. citizens through the Patriot Act, and then they're using the media to manipulate the entire population. And it's just like you cannot have. And then there's so much money in like the election. We talked about that on a show recently too, where they changed laws about that, where it's like campaign finance is protected by free speech somehow, which sounds like fucking bullshit to me. Mm-hmm. And so then all these corporations and corporations are people, and so they're able to just spend and spend and spend to get the guy that they want in exchange for who knows what and when. And then it's just like we're out like, how can you have a democracy under those circumstances? It's like all these things need to be completely untangled and undone, but it's like no one's gonna ever do it.
Going back to anthrax, there was one of those things, you see the meme now. When you were a kid, you thought quicksand would be a much bigger problem, like a bigger obstacle in life, because
I'm
there would
still
be in
terrified
so many movies.
of quicksand.
Yeah, but you just thought like it was going to be like all over the place, and you would need to know how to escape it at some point in your life because it was such a 90s movie plot.
Yep.
Anthrax was like that too. It's like, oh fuck, like this is going to be
that's the new
big
reality.
Deal. Yeah. And I wonder what happened to big anthrax.
Well, it was never big because it's like very difficult to make and to get. So the only places and then so after that, okay, that was like one thing that Obama did do was that was like we're getting in the weeds a little bit now, but Obama passed a law because they had all these. It was illegal. Biological weapons were illegal underneath the Geneva Conventions, and so supposedly the Department of Defense, they were like, we don't, and you know what the punishment was for developing them?
For developing anthrax?
But bioweapons. It was death by hanging. Okay, written into the Geneva Conventions. So you didn't fuck around with that. But if you offload that to NIH and the CDC, then they can study it and they can make it and they can make these bioweapons and they can also develop the vaccine alongside of it. And that became like a thing. And Obama came in because somebody got in his ear and was like, hey, like this is a problem. Like you got to shut this down. So Obama outlawed it. Like, hey, we are no longer going to be manufacturing or doing these gain of function things in the United States. Like it's not good. So we will not be having that. They moved it to China. They moved it to Wuhan. Okay, like literally. It's fucking like, and there's all sorts of documentation. So like Obama said, hey, no more of this. We can't do this anymore. So they're like, all right, great. And they just moved the whole lab and everything out of the United States, offshore in different places, including Wuhan. So the Center for Virology. So it's like, it's crazy how they have like, the CIA is fucking smart. Like they thought of like everything. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's so hard to know what is actually real and true. And it's just like, you just kind of just want to give up. Do you want to give up?
I mean, that's always been a thing where you never know what to believe. So
I feel like it's worse. I
don't know if it's worse. You just know more now.
Maybe, but I remember like the lead up to Iraq in 2003, and I remember like talking to my dad, and like there was that woman who was a reporter for the New York Times, and that was like speaking of anthrax, you had Colin Powell go up in front of the UN and be like, this is the fucking he held up a vial of I believe it was anthrax, be like, this is why we have to go in, because they're developing these weapons of mass destruction. And everybody just took it, even though there was like no intelligence on it. And they were New York Times, and everybody was like, we got to go in to Iraq. Like there was like a little bit of an anti-war movement like among like the people, but I remember being like, these people are fucking crazy. And I was like 17 at that point, 16, 17. And like same thing, like talked to my dad. He's like, yep, like, and teachers like, yeah, we got to go in. We can't, and then there was like the famous line that they would say. And I remember like Condi Rice would be like, you don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. As if like the first thing that you see is like, oh, we got nuked with New York City got hit with a dirty nuclear bomb and they blew up New York City. Like they didn't have any of that shit. We never found it. But like it was just pushed through the New York Times, through all the news agencies, through, and it was all just a narrative that was developed and crafted and allowed to happen through the practice of this like Operation Mockingbird. And it just like, that's why I don't trust anybody.
But even going back, we did that one podcast probably a long time ago. What was it? Jefferson bought the newspaper in his town or something like that.
I don't know if he bought it
to do a smear campaign.
Well,
against
it was
his
him
opponent.
versus Aaron Burr.
Yeah.
Was it Aaron Burr? No, John Adams.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were like, it would be like, John Adams is a hermaphrodite. Where he's
yes.
Yeah. So he said like all the worst possible like absurd things about John Adams. I don't know if he bought it. I don't know if he owned the paper, or if he would just like leak stories and they would print it for you to look it up.
There's something going on.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
It was like, it's still considered to this day the dirtiest, most vile election, like brutal election back and forth, all the things that they were accusing each other of.
Really?
Yeah. So I think that was 1800, 1804, something like 1800 maybe. So, and then they
1791.
That doesn't sound right to me.
No,
that was that election. Jefferson.
1801.
1801. Yeah, yeah. Because then, yeah, and then
he bought it. Nah, never mind.
Didn't buy the paper,
Maybe.
but he had like. But that's always been a thing in D.C. too, where, and not just D.C. but everywhere. But politicians will like, and that happens in sports too, where it's like we'll leak you something. Make you feel good. We'll give you this story, but when we tell you to shut the fuck up or push a different narrative out there about something, you better play ball. And it's like you trade. That was like the old John McDonough thing, where he would trade scoops for positive column inches. It's like, hey, why don't you do 3,000 words on how great I am, and I'll make sure that you know about the trade and the rumors first, And that was like a widely talked about thing in this market. So, and people get so mad when I say that about the Blackhawks and McDonough, and how he'd be like, oh, it popped up in the Daily Herald or the Sun Times with like this glowing article about McDonough, and then what do you know? Oh, they signed Brent Seabrook to an extension, and who got the scoop? The guy who just wrote that long article about McDonough. So so that's always been a thing, but it's a little bit different when it's like, the CIA is like telling you what to say because they're either paying you, blackmailing you, or whatever. And it's like something that is supposed to be illegal, but is now through the State Department of this Smith Modernization Act of 2012 is now like kind of legal. Mm-hmm. So they're just able to they just get away with everything. Yeah. And nobody's minding the store. I'm not. I don't fucking know anything. Yeah. I wouldn't even know how to stop. Like, how do you even stop something like this anyways? Because even if you catch on to something, let's say that you're like the world's best journalist and you're like giving it to, you're going after the government, the CIA for all these different things, or these or even if it's like somebody like 3M or, or the pharmaceutical, whatever, any of these big powerful agencies. They can just come in. If you're the one guy, they got 98 other people that are on their side because they're paying them.
They got the deck.
You're right. So it's like, well, it just becomes like an avalanche of information, and they can easily dismiss you as a conspiracy theorist or something like that. So it's I don't know. I don't know what to do about this. I kind of think we're just fucked.
Yeah, I mean that's the answer to most things.
We're just fucked.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was remember we were talking about that things I don't understand, and it was you drafted. I blogged it on Thursday, but you drafted like what are these residential buildings? These luxury residential downtown buildings. Like, who's living in those? And I was like, I don't think anybody is. Okay.
Who's living in them?
Well, Brian Callen, like, since we did that show, went on Rogan, and that topic came up. And he knew more about it than I did, obviously, because I was just like, I think I've heard something like this. He said it's like all these, foreign entities or sometimes bigger banks. And if what they do is that they get this asset from the company that builds it, then they take out a loan against it and put that money in the stock market. And you're able to, so if you're like a drug dealer, you want to do a real estate deal, you're able to kind of launder your money through the stock market. It'd be like going to the casino, right? Like, you get all this money, but you're doing it at scale. So I'm going to buy this $20 million apartment in New York City, and then I'm going to take out a loan against that asset, put the loan into the stock market, take the money out of the stock market. It's washed. Mm-hmm. It's no longer really drug money. It's all just loans and wires going back and forth. So it's like
interesting.
It's like, and that was like Dave's thing. I don't understand how money is. That's how money works. That's how money in real estate work.
Prime
right
example.
There. Yeah.
Prime example.
We got to figure out how to do that stuff.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Well, that's like, I remember when Dave first got paid for, like, I forget what deal. He's like, wait, so how do I, like...
Oh, the churning thing?
Yeah, he's like, how do I, like, make... Like, how do I just not pay anything?
Right.
And they're just like, you can't.
Right.
Like, I forgot what they said. We're like, he's not even that wealthy enough to be in
right. Well,
I forget what he said.
I was talking to this guy recently, and he's trying to, like, raise money for a business. And he went to, like, this guy that he knows is super wealthy. And he's like, you don't really need that much money for this. You only need like $5 million. He's like, oh, $5 million. He's like, yeah, why don't we go get, and this guy is like a billionaire guy. Yeah, like, you only need $5 million. Like, so instead of, like, trying to do it this way, why don't you just go up to Northern Trust with, like, they got some, like, lower, they're like, I can't remember how it was phrased, but, like, it wasn't lower income, but it was like lower net worth. And it's like that they might be interested in kicking in $500,000 and you just cobble it together. It's like they can, like, there's this bank that in CHICAGOLAND that specializes in these lower net worth individuals, and everybody's like 15 million and below, so they got a few million to toss around. And that's kind of what Dave was originally. And I remember he was on, like, the Rundown or something, or maybe it was Barstool Radio after the churning thing. And he's like, so the money hit his account. And he's like, I kind of just check it every week. It's like amazing how much money I make just on interest, because he had like millions of dollars just in a checking and a savings account. He's like, it's like I'm going up like salaries at a time just on interest. So it's like, it must be fucking
pretty
nice.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right then.
Yep.
Wild shit.
Wild.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. That's it for today. Back tomorrow with the free swim. We'll see y'all then.